All right, hello everybody. Welcome to our webinar series on getting ready for 2023. So thanks for joining us today. If you're like me in the Midwest, perhaps you're getting snowed in and it's a perfect day for a webinar. So with that being said, my name is Ben Munson. I'm a senior technology specialist with FarmQA. And today we're going to be talking about, as I just said, preparing for 23, but more specifically, how you create a crop plan in FarmQA using growing seasons, crops, varieties, how you can adjust boundaries and make field shape changes for the new year, and then how you share that data with a grower, with a colleague, or across organizations. And then finally, at the end, we'll talk through how you can use our analytics to make better planning decisions based on data captured in the current season. So with that, we'll jump in and let the product speak for itself in a demo. We will have questions at the end, so put any questions you have in the chat of the Microsoft Teams meeting, and then I will be sure to address those at the end. So I will pull up FarmQA Controller. This is our web-based platform that communicates with the mobile application. And this is where I'd suggest doing most of your planning or setup type work. And so what you're looking at in this particular case is my field view, where I've got a color-coded system representing my crops in a 2022 growing season. And the first thing I will be talking through today is how we can set up a new season altogether. And so to do that, if we go into the settings tab on the left-hand side, and then on the top middle, there's a growing season section. Now within here, you can see all the seasons that I have within my demo account, and I have a blue plus button at the bottom, which allows me to take action. So I will click the plus button, and I get two options. One is that I can duplicate an existing growing season, or secondarily, I can add a new season, which would be blank or no crop assignments at all. So the biggest differentiator here is I just mentioned, so new growing season is going to take and create a blank slate of a year, whereas duplicate is going to take the crop assignments within the selected season that you have in your blue text over here and push that into the new year. So I'll actually create one of each here to showcase the difference. So what I'll do is we will, like I just said, duplicate the season you have highlighted. So perhaps if you are doing a standard corn soybean rotation where those vary every year, you could take a previous year, say 21, and duplicate that. And now we took all those crop associations and we're just going to call this 2023. And perhaps that just saved you some work in doing assignments for the new year. So we'll call this 2023 duplicated. Now I will also create, and then we'll make sure to save this after giving it a name. And then, as I mentioned, I will also create a new season. So we'll call this just 2023. And now, as far as what we can define within a season, you can give this a description and then a state. The state is important for a couple reasons. One, we only show the active seasons on the mobile application. So draft and archive. Draft would mean it's doing what we're doing right now. We're setting up a futuristic season, which is the draft. And then, for example, we'll turn 2022 into archive once that season is said and done within the software. So the key thing is just the active being is what will allow you to see and view on the mobile application, whereas the other two are web only. And that is intentional on our side to keep the mobile app light and clean when you're trying to enter information and not wrongly associate it to a different season. So we will save that. And now what we can see is if I go back to the map view, and I'm going to grab our season picker in the top right, we're going to see those two seasons show up, 2023 and 2023 duplicated. If I click on 2023, as you can see, this is the one that I started new, no assignments. Whereas if I grab on a 2023 duplicated, now I can see that this took all the assignments from the 2021 season. So if I jump back into 21, we should see all the same assignments. In other words, the map really doesn't change at all because we took those assignments. So those are two options within the software as far as starting a new year. And you can easily delete a season as well. And so another use case for this is that you could set up a 2023 plan A, plan B, plan C. And then within that, you could set up different crop rotations and get acreage totals, chemical plans, present that to a grower, and then delete out the plans that you may not want to use. So that's another concept or an idea you can keep in mind in how you use the program. But what I want to showcase with that is that this red trash can would just allow you to delete an entire season. One thing on this is if that was a legitimate season with data in it, you would have then soft deleted that year, and you would have to contact FarmQA support to retrieve that if that was an accidental delete. So with that said, we're going to move forward with just one season, and it was the one where I started fresh, no crop assignments. So with that said, I'm going to jump into 2023, and I'm going to show you how you can start to do assignments within the software. So we start with a blank slate of a year, and as you can see in my legend, I have nothing's assigned across all 72 of my fields. What you can do in this case is you can bulk assign crops from the map view or from the list view. And I'll start by doing that from the map. And so what I'll do first of all is, let's just say you want to go field by field and do your assignments. What you can do is you can click on a field from the map. Then on the left-hand pane, you get the option to assign. And clicking that is going to pull up your drop-down list of all your crops and varieties, which you could then search and assign a particular variety to that field, crop and variety. Then you can see that that field gets assigned, and the legend updates to show me the acreage and that I have one field in the corn crop. So that's how you can do individual assignments. If you want to do that in a bulk process, if I slide out the general map detail pane, at the very bottom, you can see assign crops to field. Clicking on that allows me to select my crop. So let's say I'll put canola. And then I can start to grab the field. Oh, let me do something with a more contrasting color. We'll say beets. So now I can start to grab a series of fields. And you can see that if I were then to click assign, I'd be able to assign beets to all the fields that you see in the selection window. We also see the rolled up total acreage here as well. So I'll go ahead and do that. Now my legend's going to update. So that similar concept to what I just did, but it's in a batch process. The other thing to note, I did this down to a varietal level, but you could also just assign, let's just say canola, and you don't have to pick a variety in this process. You can assign that later on. If your grower just knows what crop they want to plant, but they don't know what variety they're going to purchase, that can be a supported scenario as well. So that's how you bulk assign crops, and we're seeing in real time how this map is updating. And at any time you can filter to say, just show me a particular crop, corn or beets, and then the map's going to snap down to show you that, so you can more easily track what you're assigning. Now, a second way to do this, as I mentioned, is from the list view. So to talk through that, we're going to click on the Fields tab. And what we see now is we're still in the 23 season, and we see each row represents a field within my demo account. What I like to do when it comes to assignments is I like to group this by crop. And so now this will segment my list based on what has an assignment and to what crop versus what does not. And so now if I look in this list, I can use things like my legal descriptions, my field names, my acreages to do my assignments. And so from here, I could now multi-select, and then in the top action pane, this is where I can do my assignments, and I get a similar pick window that I had before. So now it'll assign those crops, and you'll see that they will jump into a new category called field peas, which I selected here. So that's one process. You can also update assignments here. So let's say perhaps you wrongly assign these to beets, or the grower wants to reassociate those. You can then search and assign these to a different crop. And now just those three fields will move out of beets into a new category called soybeans. What you can see here as well is that if I assign a variety, you can see this column populates versus the fields that don't have varieties are blank. And so within that, you can filter to say, just show me those fields that have varieties, or you can actually get into a group by variety, where this will show you a breakdown where the categories in this case are the varieties themselves. So that might help you in your assignment process as well, as just as far as how you group things to then do your batch selections. You can click, shift, and click again if you want to highlight in that way. And then again, that assignment option is there. So that's one way that you can be doing your selections and assignments. A couple other things to note here is if you want, you can be putting in plant dates or suggested plant dates. So if you're looking at some varieties with different maturity dates, You can be setting your plant dates from this view as well, or you can leave that blank. It's up to you as far as how you want to present that back to the grower or how much detail you want to enter into this process. So from here, what I'll talk through is, let's say that you were going to do an assignment, but when you looked at this list, you didn't see the varieties that you're growing this year. Perhaps there's new varieties. We can update that list to encompass the new varieties or crops that you're going to deal with in the coming year. To do that, I'll go back into my settings tab. And like before we went to growing seasons, we'll go into crops/varieties this time. This is the master list of varieties within my account. So it's tailored to what crops you work with in your varieties. But what I can do in this case is, let's say I come down to corn and I see my variety list, but in this case, I want to add a variety. We have a plus button on the right-hand side. If I click on that, this allows me to enter a new variety. Let's just say I go FarmQA BT. And I can add notes about maturity. Let's say it's a 100-day maturity, and I can track that here. A couple other things you can do per variety. If you want, you can choose a custom scouting template. By default, it uses the same template as your crop. So even though it's a variety, I could assign it to use a specific template. If you, let's say you break down your varieties by different traits, you could have different scouting templates to track unique things within those varieties. So this is where you do that from a drop-down or pick list of my forms or templates. The other thing you can do is you can choose a custom color. And so what I'll do here is, by default, again, it uses the same color as a crop. But what I like to do in my demo data is I will assign a different shade of yellow per variety. And then as I add that, you can see in my variety list, I have different shades of yellow in here. And the way that works, or the reason that we have the different shading, is that, for example, if I go back to my map view and I'm going to stay in 2023, actually I'm going to go back into 2022 where I have more crop assignments. And now if I pull up my legend, by default, the legend shows the crops. But if I pull up the general map details, I can alternately color this by variety. And now you see the color coding. If I search by corn, the different yellows represent different varieties. So the shades are corresponding to what I just set there on the variety list. So that's one way you can use that color. It also is going to show up a few other places in the product. So that's how you can manipulate your crop variety list to make sure that what you are planting or going to deal with is available in that list for the coming year. You can also delete out old varieties. It won't unassign that from crops in previous years, but it would keep your list relatively clean. So another topic I want to touch on is, let's say you got a new grower, or you're working with a grower who maybe added a new sub farm. You can update and manage your, what we call your organizational tree. And what that is in my demo data, I've got my root level, my top level months and farms, and I have 2 subdivisions. These could be growers, these could be different retail locations, and you could add as many sub branches or folders underneath that as you want. So perhaps Ben and Brett are 2 agronomists at this location, and then you have farmers. So that's my tree, and I can use that to then filter my account, to snap down reports, the map view, etc. But to update that, we'll go back into settings and go into the organization tab. Now within here, let's say there's a new, maybe Ben got a new grower. Actually, I'm gonna go under Brett, and there's a new grower working underneath him as the agronomist. So I can click this blue plus button, add a new farm, and we'll call this webinar grower. And now that will create a folder underneath Brett with that name. So you can do that for multiple, add multiple folders. There's no limitation here as to how many you want to add, and then that would keep building down here. Additionally, if you have an existing grower, let's say I've got Ben and there's kind of 3 subdivisions, you could then do the similar process just to add a new division to an existing grower within your account. So that's something I would recommend doing initially. That way you can store the fields and assignments correctly by the divisions of an operation that you have. So the next thing to point out is, if you will need to add fields, to manage boundaries, to update boundaries, we'll talk through the appropriate flow for doing that. So I'll get back into my 2023 account. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to add a new field, and it's going to be for the new grower that I just added. So let's say I come in here, and now we can see those two new folders, Webinar Grower and Webinar 2. If I click my blue plus button on the bottom right, I can now add a boundary. And so this is the process if you're going to just draw this from scratch. This is the process to take. If you have an existing file, you can drag and drop it over here, and we will accept that digital boundary in the system. So one thing that I should point out is that you can also turn on from your general map pane your township section overlays, and this can help you navigate on the map to where that new field might be for this grower. So I'll have that turned on, and I know it's section 28. I want to add to this new grower. Now within this pane, I can select that the webinar grower tree or folder and give this example field 1. Legal description, this is optional, but you could put in, section 28 of Raymond Township. Now within here, you could then immediately assign a crop if you wanted. But now the important part is the draw tools. So within here, you can then use a polygon tool, for example, if you wanted to tap and drop what we call vertices to create this shape. A double tap will end the boundary, or you can tap the first point again, which will close that out as well. And you can then save that. That's now a new field within a system, within that grower, within the 2023 year. So that's how you create a field from scratch. What we'll talk about next is how you can update boundaries, split fields, and go do more kind of complex scenarios like that as far as managing boundaries. So for example, let's say we are in this, let's just use maybe this field here, 178. In 2023, this is unassigned. So what I'll do is I will assign this to a crop. So let's just say this is going to be canola. But now I want to split this field. So in 2022, this field was split, was farmed whole. In 2023, this needs to be cut in half, and it's going to be farmed differently. Within the more options of that field, you see our split tool. Clicking on that will split the field. It'll find equal parts, 50-50% representations on the acreage, and we'll programmatically do the split. However, from here, you can then edit the breakpoints. So let's say I'm just going to call this 178 north. But then within the boundary, let me say that. Within the boundary, I can then edit this and adjust the vertices to be corresponding to the better breakpoints. So that's how that would work, is if you want to split the field, and you can assign that to new crops. And if it's more of a unique shape, it might split it differently, depending, like I was saying, on how we find the 50% representation on size. There you go. So like this one's split east-west opposed to north-south. So then you can do things like name this, maybe this is west, and this is going to be potatoes. You can then see how that's represented as a split. And as I was mentioning, if you need to edit the breakpoints, you could then extend this out. Perhaps the potatoes go to this breakpoint. And then you need to update the west half. Oh, I see, now I named that wrong. We'll call it this west. And we'll update these vertices to match with that line. So that's how we handle those splits currently. You can also, if you have updated boundaries or actually planting files from, let's say, John Deere, you can upload those as shape files, and then we'll take the exact splits as opposed to just roughly cutting out the fields. But to make my point here, this was one field in 2022. So if I go back in there, you still see the full shape, whereas in 2023, we have the splits with different crops. This data still points back to a master boundary, which is the full size. And so therefore, the data, when it comes to analytics and comparisons, can still be done across the fields, even though they are split within particular years. So just to explain this further, the way this works in our system, because we had a question of, I made this change or I renamed the field, but then in a new season, I don't see that new name. The way this works is that we have a master version of all our boundaries, and The way this works is anytime you see a field that's kind of grayed out and it doesn't have a crop assigned, that's the master version. Then within any given season, you can assign that a crop, you can do your splits. And so what I'm showing here is in 21, 22, and 23, I had different breakpoints or splits and crops. But as I make those changes, they're specific to those years. And then, for example, if I wanted to rename this field and I came into 2023, clicked on that cornfield and I renamed it to, Mom's Quarter, that would only change that field and that name within 2023. It's not going to update the master version. So that means when you go to make a 2024 season, it's going to revert back to the name of 39 instead of Mom's Quarter. So if there's ever a time when you want to make a change which should go across the boundary, across all seasons, do it on the master version, which just means it doesn't have a crop assignment. And that would dictate or indicate that you are adjusting the master version of the file. So hopefully that helps. That's we've had some questions about that specifically this year going into a 2023 season. Okay, the next thing we will talk about is, let's say we want to now upload some data. So when we talk about crop plans, our ultimate goal is that we want to share information with the grower about how they should produce, what things they should be doing. And a couple of things that we as FarmQA contribute is that we allow growers in the system with a login that could be a free view only login, or they could have a paid account where they're actually entering information. But one of the things that our customers might want to do, maybe agronomists, you could upload variable rate seeding maps or variable rate fertility application maps for those growers to see within our software. So that's one thing I'll show here is I've got a field visible on my screen, and I want to upload a couple of the planting variable rates population maps for this field. So within this account, I've got my files up. These are shape files that contain the delineations of where those zones for different seeding rates should be. So if I drag that, actually at this point, I'm going to add a new layer. And now I've got files in my account which represent where these files are going to upload to. So seeding maps is a category or a folder within my account. And as I select that, I now get the drop zone where I can bring over that seeding map. And as I drop that into that field, we're going to upload and display those different seeding rates. And so now this is going to be visible to you on the mobile app or to the producer, where they can now see in this field, they can click around to different areas of the field to see those different seeding rates. And then additionally, like I just mentioned, we could upload a file that might represent your, in this case, it's a 2800 variable rate fertility application, mid-row banded, and I can drop that in to the in a similar way that I did the seeding map. And now that's going to display. One difference is that my first file, you notice that it auto-colored. That's because it came out of GK or ADMS, and we respected the styling format of those files. Whereas coming out of different systems, it may not color automatically. So you can use our built-in coloring system. I've got a webinar on kind of this full setup of specifically on map layers. But in general here, what I'm doing is I'm selecting a custom style, doing a red to green color ramp, saving that out, and now you'll see that those colors are represented on the map. So that's one way you can share some of these files with the grower. They can see, visually represent how they should be managing those, whether it's seeding or a fertility application, and that's within the layers. Additionally, when it comes to sharing data with growers, you can use our attachment feature. So if I click on this attachment section, I can now actually drag and drop these shape files in as attachments. I gotta do that one at a time. So then I can bring in, and then this is a way that they can actually download and upload those to their machines in the spring when they're actually going to enact these plans. And so now, as an attachment within this field, within the 2023 season, they've got the actual shape files or the prescriptions that will enact the variable rate fertility or seeding. So now you can see this field that has 2 attachments, and those are available within the field. Another thing I'll point out in this particular example is that within 2023, you can see that this boundary is more of a simplified shape, whereas there are cutouts for sloughs, tree rows, things like that. And so I've mentioned it a couple times as far as uploading an existing boundary. But what you can do is get into edit mode of this field, and then you can drag and drop that boundary file. So if it's out of a different system, if it's from a planter, and now you can see it auto delineates those breaks based on the more detailed boundary. And now the 2023 shape has those changes made to it based on the updated shapefile. So that's some information that you can relay, I would say, geospatial information to a grower as far as planning within the program. So we've also got the ability to, you can do crop rotations or send a report to a grower. So I talked about in the opening slides how you can get into a field view, but then generate a report for a grower to maybe make seed purchasing decisions, or just generally breaking down and helping them understand how many acres are going into each crop or variety. So to do this, I'll come back in to our field tab. And before, you had seen me interacting with the in the fields tab where I've been doing my assignments. This time I'll go into crop rotation. And now what you'll see is a breakdown where you've got different seasons representing the columns, and then the rows represent fields. A couple things that you can do within here is within my columns, I can choose what columns I want to have displayed. So for example, maybe you just want the last couple of years displayed in your columns. And so I can turn off those years. And now my grid is simplified to just having my 2023 and then my previous years before that. Now within here, what you can do on the top right, you can choose to have those colors representing your crops or just have the names. And you can also flip this into a varietal view. So if I do that, now these cells populate with the varieties that were planted opposed to just the crops. Additionally, we have the pie charts, which is going to break down the number of acres in each of those crops. And then similarly over here, this is breaking down the number of fields in each of your crops. Now, as far as the actions you can take, within this view, you can sort. So by 2022, you could say, show me all the fields that had maybe barley in them. So I sort that column. But now what you can do to do a more detailed export is you can do things like group by organization. So if I drag and drop organization in the top, I can now see my Minnesota farms and North Dakota farms having categories in here. And then more specifically within that, I could do a secondary group on crop. So now you've got within Minnesota farms, here's all your barley fields, here's all your hard red spring wheat fields. And this would allow you to see the rotations and then do your assignments in 2023. Now what you can do is you can export this to Excel. And so one thing before I do that, I'll point out is we've got the roll-up acreage totals by crop in here. And as I export to Excel, you'll see that those numbers get populated over in that Excel file as well. So this is a way that you can share this data. If they don't have logins to FarmQA, they can still see this information. So here's what that output would look like. Similar views with the seasons being columns and the fields being rows with those rolled up acreage totals in this report as well. As I mentioned, you can still do that. You can do that same thing, but by variety. So let's say you grab 2022. I'm doing 2022 just because I don't have fully populated 23 column. But now you can export out, and it's telling a producer exactly how many acres of each seed variety they need to purchase within a clean report. So that's the rotation view and an export of that. The next thing we'll talk about is how you can use our analytics tab to start to make more informed planning decisions. And boiling that down, what we're really doing is looking at any data that you captured, let's say within 2022, that you might want to use to help make 2023 planning decisions. To do that, I'll click on my analytics tab, and I'm going to go, in this case, to the report tab. And I'm going to go into a season that's got some data in it. So I will go and I'm going to search this down, and I'm going to look. Actually, I'm going to go into 21 just because I have more data in that, but you can go in at any season that you'd like and start to see, in my case, this is going to be scouting data. What I've done so far is I've grouped this by crop. So I now see all my cornfields, and I've sorted by that up here. And within this view, you see the fields represent rows, and the columns are going to be data coming off your scouting reports. So within this, as I scroll to the right, you can see things like which fields had maybe high stock rot. You can filter by that. Looking at the populations, if you want to see seed depth, that's in here. But I can also turn on additional columns. So maybe I want to see yield as well. I could turn on my yield column, and now I'm seeing that populated here as well. So at the bottom, you also see the averages. But the example I wanted to extract here is perhaps you wanted to look at something like rootworms to decide where you want to put specific varieties that have resistance to that. So I could say, show me any field where I found rootworms in this previous year. And now we have this broken down to just 5 fields or 4 fields. What you can do at this point is you can export that to Excel, and we can go back into a crop rotation view. So let's say I pull up this field that had those rootworms. Actually, I'm going to do one more example for you here. Let's say that you wanted to just do a report that had just that information in it. So what you can do here is you could generate and select just the columns that were relevant for that assignment. So let's say you're doing crops, varieties, acres, and then in my case, I'm just going to find that rootworm question. Now this really simplifies this chart. And if I export this again, now I've got an export that just has which fields had rootworms in it and the pressure values associated with that. So for example, if I go into a split screen and I'm going to grab, sorry, I got to go out of that. So now if I go into split screen and I can do my assignments within this view. So let's say I've got my rootworm fields up and I come back in my field list view and I see that field 231. So I'll search 231 had rootworm issues. So now within 2023, I can assign that to my resistant variety. So as part of my first, when I added the variety, I had FarmQA BT. That's a resistant variety to rootworms, and I assign that. And so now that's a way you can use that scouting data to make sure you're combating the fields that need that particular variety. So that's a practical use case that you can use when it comes to analytics. A couple of other things that I'll point out within that same view is that you can also start to look at more, I would say, trend line based data or map views that represent your data. So in this case, I'll go back in and look at things like maybe it's an aphid severity map. And what you want to look at is across these fields, where did you see pressure? And you could then get into a view where red represents the fields that had a high pressure, green means low. And so you could visually represent what fields might need those varieties I was just mentioning. You can click in a field to see the actual values that were recorded. So this is one way to represent that. You could also be looking at perhaps its fertility plans. And so you could look at something like a nitrogen consumption level by crop. And so within here, this is my nitrogen data that I captured and imported from a lab. And I can break this down by fields. And so you can see, as I may pull out fields and simplify this, what fields had higher nitrogen levels and how they varied throughout the year. So you can know perhaps what you need going into the next season. A better example of that might be more potassium, where it's less mobile. And you can see that averaged across crops, however you want to do your groupings within the analytics portal. So those are just a few examples of how you can use analytics to then make more informed plans and put those into the system. So with that, I'll touch on quickly how we can do some chemical plans in the system as well. And then we'll wrap up talking about how you can make some of these changes on the mobile app as well. What I'll do is I'll go into advice, and this is where we can do all of our fertility recommendations, chemical recommendations. What I'll point out, products tab, this shows you a list of all your chemicals. And so this is another thing to keep in mind as you're going into 2023. If you added new chemicals or chemistries, you can import from the EPA and add new products to your database. So let's say we look up Endura. I want to add that as a chemical. I search it, select it, add it to my product list, and then it's going to be usable in 2023. What I want to point out here, though, is that when it comes to mixes, I can set up mixes that might represent something like my corn post-emergent program versus pre-emerge versus my starter blends. And those can all be in mixes, meaning that they are more easily accessible when you write recommendations to contain a series of products and rates and costs that when you then come to recommendations, you can say, for example, I'm going to select a series of my fields, and let's just use these 2 cornfields as an example. So you can write this in a batch, meaning that you could select maybe all your cornfields are going to get the same pre-emerge, post-emerge, and fertility plan. You can select those fields. You can then choose from your mixes. So like I just got done talking about, we could search my corn pre-emerge, bring that in into the recommendation. We have the rates populated, the spray volumes, and we could put in a note here just to say pre-emerge. We do require a date in here, but so you could say something like, put that in the middle of May. Now we can do the same process, search corn again, but now I'm going to associate my post-emerge sprays with those fields. And what this is ultimately getting towards is that you can then generate a rolled up report for that producer showing him how much chemicals he needs to purchase based on these recommendations. And so you're doing this in a batch process. And let's say I'm going to put this April 1st. And then I'm going to do one last recommendation, but it's going to be based on fertility. So we'll choose those cornfields one more time. This time I'm a mix. Instead of doing a chemical spray, I'm just going to choose my starter blend. Select that, and I've got my products in there, and then I'm going to put starter, and then let's say I want this to go starter, we'll say mid-row band, save that out. So now what you get at the end of the output here is you get your applications, a rough start window in here. I didn't select the correct date here on a couple of these, but anyway, you can sort this by start date, so then it's a kind of a logical order as far as our plan goes. You can click into any one of these applications to start to see things like your totals. So I got my starter blends. I got to update my price in here, but then you can, let's just say this is, I'll just reduce that a little bit. So you can adjust prices. You don't have to use prices. You can remove that from your exports and the viewing of this, but then you can see things like your total tonnage, your cost. You can flip between the recommendations. So now here's my my post-emerge. This is my pre-emerge. But then the roll-up of this is if you select all these reports, and let's say you're going to export this into one report for that grower, you could then generate one report of all their fields, and you would have what I call the shopping cart. So this first page has across all 3 recommendations. You have, you need this much total abound, this much Acheron, this much starter blend, and the pricing breakdown. And then as you scroll through here, this is going to break it down by application. So here's all the fields that need that starter blend with the totals. Here's all the fields that need that post-emerge, etc. So that is one way to get your roll-up totals for the producers. You can also then view this. One other way to get to that similar report is that if you come back to a field specific view, so let's go into 231. What you can see here is you'd be able to get to our, be able to get into our field journal and generate that same report. So here's 231. I see the 3 events, and so these are those recommendation plans. But now if I export from a PDF from this view where you're looking at the ledger of what needs to be done in the future, in this futuristic season, it'll now give me a similar export or PDF report for a specific field, telling me kind of date by date, here's the field, the name, the description, legal description. We're going to do these applications, and then you get the roll-up total at the bottom. So it's a way of doing it at a field level, opposed to the one previous was a roll-up across the entire farm. Now, I know we're getting close on time, but I want to point out a few things that are new, that would be new to our users going into 2023 that were not available in 2022, are the changes you can make on the mobile application. So what we can do here is you can create a plan, but when it comes to you're going out to scout for the first time and you realize that the variety is not correct or the crop is actually changed from the plan, what you can do from the mobile app now is, let's say we come into a field and I'm going to pick on this grid sampling north field. What I can do is from the app, we now have this ... menu option where my mouse is. If I click on that, you can now edit the shape directly from the app. Before, this was only possible from the web view. And so this would allow you to say you just cut the field, but the grower is going to cut out that northwest little section there. Now, if I update that, that boundary is going to be changed and I can start scouting. And so you can make those real-time changes from the app. You could also change crops. So let's say you get to this field and the plan was it was going to be beets, and the grower last minute, they put something else in the hopper and it's canola. So you can set that and now it's going to update. You can make all those changes offline as well, and they'll be put into a queue on the mobile app for when you get connectivity. Those changes will get pushed back to the web view as well. So you can make those changes happen. Another thing that I mentioned earlier is, let's say your plans only include the crop. You can then save the varietal assignments to the mobile app, where you can then get a drop-down list of your varieties, and you can set those later on. So it doesn't have to happen as part of the plan. It can happen from the mobile app when you're talking to producers or where it may be. So those are some updates. The other thing that did come in, we talked about creating new fields. What's new on the mobile app now is if you want to create a new field from the app, we've always had our draw tools. So the polygon, the circle tool. But what's new is you can now drive boundaries. So if you want a high precision boundary, you click on the little truck icon, click the record. This will now use your GPS, and you could physically walk, drive around the boundary, and then that will update and give you the exact acreage of what you just drove. So another thing to keep in mind there, and something that you can change. And again, this is more so, I think it relates to planning in the sense that plans can be static and may need to change. And this is a good way to do it, is from the app in real time. So hopefully that was some of the content you're hoping to see, kind of creating new seasons, making sure your crop variety list is up to date, your chemical list is up to date, editing the organizational structure. One thing we did talk about, maybe I should end on this, is that we talked about getting growers access. So if really the end goal in the program is you're inputting these plans, these variable rate prescriptions, you then want them to have an account. You can do that within users, the blue plus button. Then within here, you enter in an email, a name, and a password. Then you can select a role. So they could be just a free view only user. And the key thing here is to select or add them just to their branch. So within here, maybe you just want to add them to the webinar grower tree, and then you can save that out, and then they will then have access at just that level. That's a way that you can be interacting with your growers, where, for example, if they want to make changes to the plan, they can actually be updating the crops from the map view, and you can see that in response on your side to say, oh, okay, they changed this from corn to soybeans, and get that in real time. Or as I set plant dates, you can see that. So that's the process for adding growers, but then the goal is that you have this better pipeline between the producers and yourself with entering data, seeing the changes, seeing the plan for the coming year. So with that, we're going to turn it over for some questions. If you aren't going to be staying for that, appreciate you joining. We have future webinars coming up. Please stay tuned for that. And as always, reach out with questions directly if you have them. And we look forward to working with you again in 2023. Thank you.